So whether you have monthly board meetings or whatever frequency you have, how do you ensure that they're productive, rewarding and efficient for all the trustees, and such that they're not a smorgasbord of opposing topics? The first is to agree the agenda with the head of school. You may have certain ideas or objectives for the meeting, but the head of school may also have pressing issues that needs to be discussed, or things that are perhaps formal requirements. For example, the business manager may have discussed with the finance committee that they need to establish a new bank account, but the bank may require a specific board resolution that has to be minuted, for example. There's a formal need to approve the minutes of the last board meeting, and to review and approve or otherwise reports from the committees or from the administration. As we've seen in other videos, there are ways to streamline these elements of the agenda through timely issuance of minutes and error checking, and some reports may be able to be adopted through a consent agenda, where unless there are comments or questions, the reports are accepted into the record pretty much as they stand. While this may be possible for some agenda items, such as reporting student numbers, usually committee reports or the head of school reports need some opportunities for explanation. That doesn't mean that every section needs to be read out loud, as that is a certain way to disengage your trustees. Encourage the person leading that section of the report to assume as far as possible that the trustees have read the reports and they've had the opportunity to ask questions in advance. But the verbal account is to only be used to expand on complex or sensitive topics, or those that need a dialogue or resolution by the board. Actually, you can encourage the trustees to reach out to the author of the report before the meeting if it's simply a fact-checking type question that needs to be queried, as this too will speed up the board meetings, and therefore only bring forward to the board meeting those more general questions or observations that have a wider implication that all the trustees need to be involved with. By doing this, you'll develop the expectation that the trustees attend the meeting having prepared in advance, but also engage them with discussions or questions on those pertinent topic areas. So your board meetings may require substantial chunks which are procedural, approving reports, etc. However, as chair, you have to set the pace and the agenda so that you can create time and space to discuss the bigger strategic and generative topics. By controlling the agenda, you can also control when you set aside the time for these discussions. And while it may be tempting to start with the administrivia, there's nothing stopping you dedicating a block of time at the start of the meeting, for example, when people are still fresh and energetic. Identifying big strategic discussions in advance with supporting documentation helps trustees mentally prepare in advance of the meeting. The whole reason for having this diverse group of trustees is the expertise and insight that they can bring, and it's your job as chair to maximize this potential. There may even be specific meetings where you want to minimize unnecessary administration and to suspend any reports to allow you to focus on key issues with little distraction. Equally, there may be times when you want the trustees to reflect on the issue and gather their thoughts before engaging in discussions, and so a silent start may be appropriate. Any time a discussion topic is introduced, there's a danger that the initial views provide an anchor for subsequent discussions, and that's why it may be helpful to have people spend a few minutes to reflect individually before their views may be influenced by comments from other people. There may be important discussion topics during the meetings that can be influenced by the initial direction taken by the group, and so the process of splitting the board into smaller groups allows the possibility that each group's discussions might take a different path, and so when the groups are brought back together and asked to present a summary of their discussions, you may find that there's been a wider spread of thoughts and views than if the discussion was taking place just in one large board meeting. Of course, this depends on the number of people sitting around the board table, but the point is that you'll want to be reflective and consider the best ways to generate meaningful and insightful discussions by the board. In many international schools, trustees are a bit like a revolving door, where there may be quite a high turnover and uncertainty about the backgrounds of who's serving on the board with you. This is different to working in your corporate environment, for example, where there would have been a recruitment process to ensure the right fit prior to hiring them, or you may have worked closely with colleagues as part of your established teams. For a self-perpetuating board, then there will have been some form of a selection process. But for elected trustees, there may be little control over who is elected to serve and their motivation for being there. Regardless, as the chair, you have to work with the individuals in front of you and to get the best out of the team and to ensure that they're cohesive and resolute in their decisions. People join the board for various reasons, and particularly those new to their role may feel uncertain about how they can best contribute. Quite naturally, people tend to gravitate towards the technical aspects where their professional expertise can help, perhaps focusing on strategy, finance, marketing, or technology. However, as a chair, you have to not only balance these skills across the board and ensure that they don't blur the lines with operational matters within the school, but you also have the responsibility for the overall health and effectiveness of the board. These latter aspects are not usually well defined or even recognised, but surely having a board that's free from political infighting, that has clearly understood goals and intentions, and has high levels of engagement are surely critical indicators of a successful board. So how can you build a cohesive and cooperative board? If we start with trust, trust can be a difficult concept to pin down, and yet it is the cornerstone of a successful board. There needs to be trust that deliberations are kept confidential, and while you encourage diversity of viewpoints and ideas, once the board commits to its decision, then it needs to be endorsed by every trustee as if it was their own. Discussions in meetings may be robust in that they shouldn't shy away from challenging questions or differences of opinions. As chair, you have to ensure that the conversation remains focused, and while there may be healthy conflict, there shouldn't be personal attacks or accusatory comments made. How can you bring clarity to the work of the board? Well, in recognizing that the trustees around the table have different experiential backgrounds and may think differently, there are two broad areas that you may want to reflect on and build into discussions with the board on a regular basis to help ensure alignment. The first, along the lines of Simon Sinek's work, is why do we exist? Why does the board do what it does? And why is it important? And how do the school's core values and guiding statements drive your conversations and so guide the school as it responds to the challenges? Second is to be as explicit as you can about exactly what you do through creating a set of essential agreements for trustees, defining the terms of reference for committees, identify priorities for the board in the year ahead, and to be clear about the strategies that are most crucial for the board to focus on. As part of this, trustees will need to be clear about what roles they must play individually and collectively for the board to meet its strategic goals. Remember that there may be aspects of the school's guiding statements that you're less clear about, and this is where you can reach out to work collaboratively with the head of school to come up with strategies to ensure that you're both guided by them while positively reinforcing them. Being honest with the head of school about your limited knowledge of the school or its mission or values wouldn't be seen as a weakness, but rather, I'm sure, would be instead be seen as an open door to assistance and meaningful conversations. As has been mentioned, often the board's only direct hire employee is the head of school, who in turn is responsible for the rest of the staff. There are valid reasons why accreditation protocols identify explicitly standards related to the relationship between the board and the head of school. These haven't been invented out of thin air, but rather have been crafted based on countless examples of good practice in international schools and case studies deconstructing where schools have made catastrophic mistakes. Unfortunately, there are still trustees and boards that ignore these guidelines, and when schools are in serious trouble with disgruntled staff or parents, oftentimes it can be traced back to the fissures between the board and the head of school. As chair, you have a responsibility to build a trusting and productive relationship with the head of school. In addition to the formal structured meetings, it's helpful to build time into your schedule every week to touch base with the head of school, whether through a quick meeting over coffee or a phone call. These less formal meetings help you identify problems early to better understand what the head of school is doing and what are the potential issues before they blow into something bigger. Building this relationship builds trust and develops a style of no surprises. In this way, you're much more likely to be prepared for the awkward questions that may arise in meetings and to be in a position to understand the challenges the head of school is facing. Finally, as board chair, there are some uncomfortable conversations that fall only to you. It could be, for example, that a fellow trustee isn't pulling their weight or hasn't been forthcoming in disclosing a conflict of interest. Or perhaps a particular trustee is not behaving according to the agreed guidelines, perhaps sharing confidential information. In avoiding that difficult conversation, it's not only not helping the other person, it's hurting your credibility within the rest of the team, the board. It's perfectly natural to avoid the painful conversations, and we may try to convince ourselves that we're protecting that person. But as the chair, you have more to lose than a difficult talk, as stakeholders will often seize any such opportunity to attack your personal integrity. Having listened to this overview of the role of the chair, what aspects resonated with you that you should reflect on more? What do you need to do now to bring those ideas more clearly into focus?